Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Since the first of the year, I have started to read War and Peace by Tolstoy, and I realize that it's not a book that I will have a lot to say about, possibly until I finish the book. There are nice sentences here and there, nice scenes which I have liked, but nothing that merits a video of any sort. On the other hand, I don't want my channel to go completely dormant for want of things to say. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about something that was in my mind a few days ago. It has left my mind, but I will try to bring it back. I was in the comment section, and I view the comment section of any online forum as merely a place to sort of chit-chat, toss ideas back and forth perhaps, but nothing to get too serious about. I recall many years ago, I was in an elevator at a job where I had sort of been before, and I bumped into a guy that I had worked with before, and he asked me how I was, and I went into this long spiel. I was not doing so well, and I said words to that effect, and by the time we got out of the elevator, the guy said, "Hey, it's not a court of law here." And of course, I was young and didn't realize that when people ask you, "How are you?" that they may not really be wanting to know how you are. Well, I feel sort of the same with online forums. The comments, we go back and forth, sometimes perhaps engage in a bit of repartee, but nothing so serious as to warrant testimony such as you would find in a court of law. So we were talking, and typing, of course, and my online friend informed me that he was a recipient of a MFA, Masters of Fine Arts degree in poetry. So I made what I intended as sort of an innocuous comment, and I can't remember exactly what I said, so the truth comes out or something like that. And it was not as innocuous as I had thought. He said in response, "I suppose you're against MFA programs." Well, so I've been thinking about MFA programs. The truth to tell is that I know nothing about MFA programs. When I was in school, getting my bachelor's, I don't think it ever presented itself as an option that was available to me, so I never thought about it. I took a couple of poetry workshops with Paul Carroll, a Chicago poet, and he did all kinds of things for which he didn't get credit, and I believe it was a sore point with him. But I believe amongst his many accomplishments, he had established Masters of Fine Arts programs in at least one or two universities. He was an anomaly. He was of the Beat generation, and he was teaching at University of Illinois, Chicago Circle campus by virtue of a PhD, I believe. But he had never gotten a master's degree. He had just sort of leapfrogged that step. But so he was instrumental in the early days, I believe, of the teaching of poetry as a widespread activity, which it became and has continued to be, possibly even worldwide now. And I am wondering if the MFA program in poetry has to do with giving folks credentials to enable them to teach the writing of poetry. Now, I don't know, and I believe having such credentials are not necessary in the academic world, yes, perhaps, but in the poetry world, I believe not. I follow on Blogspot a poet from Maine named Dawn Potter, and I believe she does not have any of these advanced degrees. What she has is a series of books, both poetry and criticism of sorts and memoirs to her credit. And so she teaches writing and workshops poetry and that sort of thing without the benefit of one of these degrees. But because I was not so sure about what an MFA entailed, I looked it up on Wikipedia. So a Master of Fine Arts is a terminal degree. That's kind of a scare right there. A terminal degree in fine arts, including visual arts, creative writing, graphic design, photography, filmmaking, dance, theater, other performing arts, and in some cases, theater management or arts administration. It is a graduate degree that typically requires 2 to 3 years of postgraduate study after a bachelor's degree, though the term of study varies by country or university. Coursework is primarily of an applied or performing nature, with the program often culminating in a thesis exhibition or performance. The first university to admit students to the degree of Master of Fine Arts was the University of Iowa in 1940. Now, Paul Carroll had some kind of affiliation with the writers program at the University of Iowa, but I no longer know what it was, or if I ever knew, and I don't know that a good biography has been written about him. I believe some years ago there was a good essay written by Paul Hoover that I probably have photocopied somewhere in a file, but I haven't thought to look at it in a long time, and maybe that would give me some information. But he remains one of the unsung beats, even as many of the once sung beats are becoming less and less sung every year. So Wikipedia also gives a comparison with related degrees. The Master of Fine Arts differs from the Master of Arts in that the MFA, while still an academic program, centers on professional artistic practice in the particular field, whereas programs leading to the MA usually center on the scholarly, academic, or critical study of the field. Additionally, in the United States, an MFA is typically recognized as a terminal degree. There it is again. I feel like I'm going to die. A terminal degree for practitioners of visual art, design, dance, photography, theater, film, video, new media, and creative writing, meaning that it is considered the highest degree in its field, qualifying an individual to become a professor at the university level in these disciplines. So I am not sure then if poetry fits under the rubric of a creative writing degree, but it sounds like it would not be apart from the practice of poetry or writing poetry. So I have no qualms whatsoever about people going to school and studying a subject and even getting a degree. Here. He likes to chase this thing. So pardon me, we're going to be doing this throughout the rest of this video, I bet. So I think it's all fine and good. Now, if the question were, do I think that having an advanced degree is necessary to the writing of poetry, I would say no, and I doubt anybody would suggest that it was necessary to the writing of poetry. So that does not put me against MFAs by any means. Now that I look back, I had a class that required a senior project that was perhaps very much like a condensed or truncated version of such a program in my senior year of college. And I produced a book of poems for that project. I don't know why I brought that up. Well, let me take it a different direction then. Thoughts about this led to a book by Shivani called Against the Workshop. And I believe I even included it in an unhaul video that I did. I gave away my copy of the book earlier, well, actually sometime last year. And perhaps too bad I could have referred to it, but it turned out not to have been a book much to my liking. But I saw what Google had to say about the book, and it seems to tie in with this question of the MFA programs, because here's how Google Books describes it. Against the Workshop is the first sustained critique of 21st century literary production in America under the MFA Creative Writing Program infrastructure. Since earlier critics like John Aldridge wrote on the subject, the creative writing regime has become vastly more institutionalized. Publishing has changed, but what does it mean for the quality of fiction and poetry? This book brings the subject completely up to date by focusing on fiction and poetry generated during the last decade. The book contrasts the vast amount of sludge with the rare gems to argue that the creative writing product is a debased one that will not stand the test of time. Now, this book came out at least 10 years ago, and at that time I was much more involved in the writing of poetry. I have since retired. I did my last book last year, and I suppose it to be my last book, but it is astounding how much one's views on things change depending on one's situation in life. I am constantly reminded of T.S. Eliot when he expressed some bemusement at people trying to hold him to a careless sentence he may have typed out 50 years before, when his views on things had changed, and he in some cases didn't even remember what he meant. Well, I may say something of the same. The book Against the Workshop by Shivani, he wrote and possibly still writes columns for the Huffington Post, which was big at the time. You never hear about them anymore. But I liked his essays because he was an original thinker and he thought everything through from the ground up. Uh, when I did get a hold of the book, it was disappointing, and I don't have the book anymore to refer to explicitly tell you why it was disappointing. But I wasn't sure about the title of the book, so I looked it up. And when I looked it up, I saw a piece from my own blog from 9 years ago talking about the book, which I had just gotten. And so I'm going to read you what I wrote. In some cases, I don't quite know what I meant. I cannot look at my past writing in prose particularly without a feeling of revulsion. The poetry I simply don't look at. So 9 years ago, in January of 9 years ago, I had gotten the copy. So let me just read this and see what I can make of it. Against the Workshop by Honest Shivani has been on my list for a while because I thought it might help me on the essay I wanted to write. I took the plunge and acquired it. My plans, at least for the time being, have fallen through. And furthermore, instead of being a reasoned critique about the title subject, the book is merely a smattering of assorted writings, many of them available online to diverse ends. Still, several do address it. Why is American fiction in its current dismal state? Is one of those. Nevertheless, instead of reading straight through, I've approached the pieces selectively. Do I really want to see an individual writer or a book demolished, which I have already made my mind up on? Jory Graham again? No, thank you. So I suppose he must have had included in the book essays about specific writers, specific poets, that kind of thing. It was, as I recall, really a hodgepodge. The essay that I was intending to write never got written. I don't even remember what the subject of that essay was supposed to have been. Maybe it was indeed against the Workshop. I don't know. I took 2, if not 3 workshops with Paul Carroll, and I don't think Paul Carroll taught me how to write poetry. He did point my direction a little bit away from an error I was making, which I talked about in my video in defense of E.E. Cummings. I'll put a link in the description. But he did not teach me how to write poetry, and from that standpoint, the workshops would be called failures. But of course, they weren't failures. They were very good experiences for me, not the least because I found myself enmeshed within a community of would-be poets, people who were interested in poetry, reading it and writing it, or possibly writing it. Some people were just curious to see if that would be a possible course of study. And of course, there were people who were in the class simply because they wanted an easy A. Let me continue with this piece that I wrote. And I should put a link to it in the description as well, though I don't know how long my website will be up. It was heartbreaking to read from the introduction, and this is slightly amended. You can go to the web page and see how I've amended what Shivani wrote. It was heartbreaking to read from the introduction. At least the literary gatekeepers everywhere are visibly biting the dust. He has studied the scene and in his essay on fiction discusses the mechanics of it, with many of his tropes applicable equally well to poetry. Still, the limits of this kind of inspection are evident. The writer today has issues to worry about beyond who gets published and why. Now, I don't even know what that means, but while I was reading some of the precursor about the MFA system, it reminds me of the book that I just read by John Kenneth Galbraith and the whole planning system. I can possibly link one of those videos, or you can just scroll down a few days and see what I said about Galbraith. This whole planning system evolved because of the technological requirements for complex products. And is there any reason to suppose that an aspect of that kind of planning system would not find its way into other aspects, the once putative, creative aspects of the university? Indeed, why not? And so now, with an insight that I did not have 9 years ago, I would indeed suppose it to be so. Now, I don't know if a planning system approach will help the isolated Gerard Manley Hopkins out there to write a better poem. So Shivani writes, contemporary literary fiction has chosen to marginalize itself from mainstream culture. It has its own niche, like specialized Foucauldian sociology or Derridian philosophy, catering to the sensibilities of other experts in the field. Now, I have a few books by Foucault, and have never read them, and I've heard of Derrida and tried to read him and been unable to. So I guess that's what Derridian means. So that's Shivani. Now back to me. This certainly seemed an apt description of what I found recently at the sites pertaining to conceptualism in writing. I have no idea what those sites were. The Coterie, another of the group's code words, seems to be writing to no one outside of its closed academic circle. There is no reason this should be deemed wrong. Even a Finley or a Momigliano wrote treatises for a select and narrow audience of specialists from time to time, though much else was designed to appeal to the generalist. If the general or the lay reader has been dropped from consideration, one has the sense that academia tries to bring more people into its select compass, hence the adoption of jargon across boundaries. Again, I have no idea what I was trying to say or what I was referring to. I have to say that such contemporary literary fiction as I have read in the past couple of years does not seem to be making any effort to exclude anybody from its purview or from its audience. The essay, Writers in Universities, addresses more directly the issue. And then here's Shivani again. University teaching has... come on, Dodo. Sorry. University teaching has the following overlapping deleterious effects on writing. And then there's a whole bunch of them listed. A, shrinkage of the writer's audience to like-minded academics. B, disinterest in the fiction and poetry of public import. C, inability to redraw the given boundaries of the chosen genre. D, lack of risk-taking and subversion because of the shrunken reconceptualization of the writer's status. E, infinitesimal subdivisioning of the writing rather than branching out to encompass competing genres, a typical academic malady. Should that not just simply be subdividing instead of subdivisioning? F, focus on immediate reward rather than continuance of the literary tradition. G, withdrawal from public engagement to the fatal detriment of literature's timeless values. And H, reorientation toward the lowest common denominator, dumbing down writing. I'm not sure how to address any of those. I'm sure that I thought they were worth contemplating back then, 9 years ago. Now that I am done with my poetic career, my illustrious writing career, to quote my late friend Richard Huddle, I find that I am not jostling for space with anybody else. And indeed, I wonder why I ever felt that I was. But I must have done. When we are young, we are trying to find a place in the sun. We are trying to get our own little bit of real estate, even if it be on the pages of Poetry magazine. Then I go on to say, none of this is exactly hokum, but some of his points strike me as being eccentric or expressive of a curtailed outlook. In trying to summarize his gist to a friend, I wrote, well, this is a comment. I'm sure I shared something on Facebook and then wrote to a literary friend online. So, characterizing the book, I wrote, really less substantial than I would have wished, but he gives a good description of all the poetry being written in today's MLA culture as being career-driven, in which case, oh, this is off the cuff here. It's a 3-step process. 1, teachers have to teach absurd ideas like voice. He rants on about this, and then can't help but have their writing begin to resemble the rules they preach. 2, to make headway in your career, you have to write kinda in imitation of your teachers. And 3, for God's sake, don't say anything substantive or wave-making, as that might derail your career. So that was what I wrote to a friend on Facebook. I don't know how he replied. In Shivani's own words, university writers teach simplistic rules. The writer's own writing then begins to reflect it. Yet another effect of the writer's assimilation in the university is the degradation of the literary journal. Writing programs like Stanford like to take young and inexperienced writers, then mold them according to the rules. Back to me now. Too bad the entire essay is not available online. I'm not inclined to try and flesh out and rehash what the author has stated succinctly himself. The book is recommended, if with the caveat that a lot of the matter addresses specific concerns and may be extraneous to one's inquiry. Still, nuggets of concentration of ideas here. Still, nuggets of gold can be worth the work of separating. There is a good concentration of ideas here. If contemporary provocations, polemics, controversies. The book's subtitle, "In Today's Literary Milieu, Piqued the Curiosity." I wanted to show you the cover of that book. I don't know if this is real visible. You can't really see the letters in white, but that's exactly what the subtitle was. And then I just go on to the conceptualism. And I don't know what I was so worked up about at the time. Now it all seems to be much ado, not much ado, much ado about nothing. But I was evidently subject to the notion, which honest Shivani fleshed out, that the writing promulgated in the university system was inferior. I had no direct experience of it. I was not involved in any of these programs. And I don't even see why the majority of something being inferior in the arts should be taken as a negative point. I think somebody has a rule. It's not Murphy's rule, but it's somebody's rule. 99% of everything is bad, or something like that. And it just goes with the course. I mean, I'm sure 99% of individual poems by persons who were not in academia are bad as well. And I include myself within that, as liable as anybody else, subject to the whims of time. So I think the whole system probably merits some review, because from what I know about writing, it is essentially a solitary activity, and nobody needs anybody to teach them how to write. It's fine if somebody has a mentor or somebody like that to give them some directional assists. And I really don't fault any young practitioner. And I should say I speak largely about poetry here. I don't fault anyone for looking up to an elder for tips, for direction, even for advice on submitting, if that's what the game is. I never did well with that aspect myself. But sometimes I see there are a lot of people on YouTube and even BookTube who want to be writing instructors, and they will give out bits of advice here and there. I don't think I will go into any of some of the absurd things that I've heard, but I think that writing of all the arts is an art that does not require any kind of laying on of hands or passing down of traditional techniques. Something like sculpture, perhaps, is different, where you're working with materials and you need a period of apprenticeship. Writing, and especially writing poetry, does not work that way. But that said, if somebody feels that the framework that the university system provides is a boon to them in their effort to learn how to write, or effort to study even a field such as poetry. I say more power to you. With the Anthropocene barreling down upon us and the global warming climate situation possibly soon to be spiraling completely out of control in ways that we can't predict, I think that all such topics as writing poetry are a cat just made a leap, and I was afraid that this was going to come down. The writing of poetry is going to be considered insubstantial, I think. I don't think that we are going to be having this vast infrastructure of people learning how to write. And here and there, people will learn how to write in the old way, just by reading and trying to figure things out for themselves. So this is just sort of a very digressive chat prompted by thoughts about the MFA system, a system with which I have no personal experience. And as I say, when I was getting my bachelor's degree, was never in my ken. It was never something that even loomed as a possibility for me. So I will let go of the topic there. And as I say, I will provide some links in the description. Thank you for stopping by my channel.